There is a man whose name you have almost certainly never heard. And yet, without him, the United States of America might not exist. Not just that it might not have won one battle. Not just that it might not have signed one treaty. It might not exist at all as a nation, as an idea, as the place where you are standing right now. And the reason you have never heard his name is the same reason his story is one of the most amazing, frustrating, sad, and finally victorious stories in the whole history of this country. He was enslaved. He was black. And in the middle of the most deadly and important war of the 18th century, he walked into enemy territory, shook hands with the man leading the British Army, sat in their meetings, listened to their plans, smiled at their jokes, and then walked out again, carrying in his mind the exact information that would defeat that British general on the most important battlefield of the Revolution. His name was James Armistad. And one day after the war ended, after the country had been created, after the Constitution had been written and signed, after the celebrations had ended and the decorations were taken down, after the heroes had received their statues and paintings and places in history books, he went back to being property. He went back to being owned. He went back to working in the fields of the man who had always owned him, William Armistad of New Kent County, Virginia, doing exactly what he had done before the war, growing tobacco in a country he had helped build but was not allowed to call his own. And every day he worked in those fields, every day he bent down to the soil of Virginia, he carried inside him the knowledge of what he had done. The knowledge that he, one enslaved man, with nothing but his intelligence, his bravery, and his amazing ability to make people trust him, had looked the strongest military force in the world in the eye and made it fail. This is his story, and it is time. You knew it. Welcome to History USA. I am asking you right now, before we go any further, to get comfortable because what you are about to hear will take some time. Not because the story is stretched or made more dramatic than it really is, but because the facts themselves are so full, so detailed, and so filled with twists that telling them properly takes space. This is the story of the American Revolution, as you have never heard it before, seen through the eyes of the man who may have done more to decide its ending than any general, any diplomat, or any founding father. This is the story of James Armistad Lafayette, the spy who saved a nation that did not save him. Let us begin, as all stories of the Revolution must begin, with the world as it was before the war changed everything. And in Virginia in the 1750s, the world that James Armistad was born into was so different from ours that you must imagine it carefully to understand it. Virginia in the middle of the 18th century was tobacco country. And tobacco was not just a crop. It was the engine of an entire way of life. A way of life built on something that people knew, deep down, was wrong. Enslaved people worked on the large farms along the rivers. Enslaved people planted the crops, took care of the plants, cut them, dried them, and loaded them onto ships that sailed to places like London and Bristol and Rotterdam. Enslaved people created the wealth of Virginia, and that wealth created the powerful landowners. And those landowners, men like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Patrick Henry, would later lead a revolution based on the idea that all men are equal. James Armistad was born into this world around 1748. Even his exact birth date is not known because records were not carefully kept for enslaved people. He was born on the farm of William Armistad in New Kent County, Virginia, a large and successful estate. The land had wide rivers, flat fields, and heavy summer heat that made the air feel thick. He took the last name Armistad from his owner, as was common, Because enslaved people were not allowed to keep their own family names, they were treated as property, just like animals or tools. What we know about James Armistad's early life is limited. Records are incomplete. Stories are few. But we know he grew up on that farm and worked there as his owner required. And during those years, he developed skills that would later make him one of the best spies of his time. He was observant. He was quick. He had an excellent memory. And most importantly, he had a special ability to make people trust him. He could sit with someone and quickly make them feel comfortable. He made people feel safe. And in spying, that is one of the most important skills. The war came slowly to Virginia, and then suddenly. The fighting in Massachusetts in 1775 felt far away at first, but the effects spread. Leaders met. Armies formed. The Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, saying all men are equal, even though many of those leaders owned enslaved people. Enslaved people noticed this contradiction. James Armistad noticed it too. The war was also about slavery. The British offered freedom to enslaved people who joined them. Many escaped and chose the British side. They believed it gave them a better chance at freedom. James Armistad made a different choice. By 1781, the war had been going on for 6 years. The outcome was still uncertain. The British had strong forces. They planned to win by controlling Virginia. Their leader was General Charles Cornwallis, an experienced and skilled commander. Against him was the young Marquis de Lafayette, only 23 years old. Lafayette needed information. He needed to know what the British were doing. Without it, he was guessing. In this moment, James Armistad appears in history. His owner allowed him to work with the American Army as a helper. But something bigger happened. James volunteered to spy behind British lines. Lafayette agreed. James pretended to be a runaway slave and entered the British camp. They believed him. Think about that. He walked into enemy territory, knowing he could be killed if discovered. He lived among them, listened to their plans, and risked his life every day. The British found him useful. They trusted him. They even asked him to spy on the Americans. This gave him the perfect cover. He became a double agent. He gave the British false information and gave Lafayette real, detailed intelligence. This helped Lafayette make smart decisions. In 1781, the British moved to Yorktown. James reported this. It allowed Washington to plan a trap. American and French forces surrounded the British. The French Navy blocked escape. The siege of Yorktown began. It lasted about 20 days. It was carefully planned and executed. Important positions were captured. The British could not continue. On October 17, 1781, they surrendered. The war was effectively over. James Armistad was there. He saw it happen. He helped make it happen, and he was still enslaved. After the war, he returned to the farm. He went back to being property. He asked for his freedom. He explained his service. His request was denied. The law did not recognize his role as a spy. He had risked everything, and it was not enough. But the story does not end there. In 1784, Lafayette returned to America. He met James again. He wrote a letter supporting his freedom. This time, the request was taken seriously. In 1787, James Armistad was finally freed. He took the name James Armistad Lafayette. He bought land. He built a life. He had a family. He later received a small pension for his service. It was not much, but it was recognition. In 1824, Lafayette returned again. They met one last time. Two men who had trusted each other in war. James Armistad Lafayette died in 1832 as a free man. His story teaches us important truths. Many black men helped fight for independence. The ideals of freedom were not applied equally, and many important stories were ignored for a long time. But his story is also about courage, intelligence, and determination. He made a choice. He took a risk. He helped change history. He lived his life with strength and dignity. That is why his story matters. We should know his name. We should share it. Because history is not just about famous leaders. It is about everyone who played a part. James Armistad Lafayette was one of them. Remember that name. Say it. Write it. Share it with others. Because stories like this should not be forgotten. This has been History USA. If this story moved you, share it with someone who has never heard his name. Share it with a student, a teacher, a friend. That is the best way to honor his memory. Subscribe if you have not subscribed. We bring new stories regularly, each one showing the full and real history. The story that includes everyone. There are many names we still need to remember. James Armistad Lafayette is one of them. He will not be the last. The man who saved the revolution. The spy who changed the war. The man who was denied freedom but fought for it anyway. He lived long enough to be free. He died on his own land, with his own name. We will keep telling stories like his. Until then, remember the name, James Armistad Lafayette.